Alright, so this is SIRUI's 40mm T1.8 and it's the first autofocus anamorphic lens to ever be released. Now when they told me about this lens, I didn't know what to expect just because anamorphic and autofocus don't exactly mesh very well. However, you're going to be pleasantly surprised on how well this performs and what you're actually getting out of it. So diving into the build here, it is an all metal lens. So you do have a nice construction and it is quite sturdy. Now the rings, which are quite important, are also quite smooth. The aperture ring itself has a declick mode, so you can actually get a nice smooth transition, or if you want it clicked, you can just toggle it back. You also have an autofocus lock button and a manual focus and autofocus button right below it, so you can always switch between the two, which is important, especially for a cine lens like this. And as you can see here, they did opt to keep the gear rings, which is a plus in my books, just because not a lot of autofocusing lens will decide to keep that, or they just are only on manual focus lens, and I think that's just really stupid. More often than not, I'm probably putting some gear rings on my lenses anyways, just because I want to be able to pull manually with a follow focus system. And this, just having it built in, makes it a lot easier for those camera operators to do so. Now getting into the front a bit here, this is a 77mm thread on the inside, because on the outside it does have an 80mm thread. Now for the size that you're getting, it's actually not that heavy as well, because at only around 614 grams, including the motors, it's still lighter than some of these anamorphics out there, not to mention that it is a metal build. Yeah, it's pretty clean. I mean, I'm not that surprised SIRUI has started opting for this design. On their previous 85 Aurora, it's been a blast actually bringing that on shoots. It has a nice solid construction, and I'm glad that they brought it to this one as well. Now, I think the biggest thing that everyone is probably wondering is how well that autofocus actually works. And honestly, SIRUI did a stellar job in getting this to be functional. So yes, at 1.33, this autofocus actually works. It works with face tracking, it works with your point focus. It's perfect for when you're just trying to run and gun and just take a nice anamorphic shot without having to worry about focusing. Now, there is caveats to this, and it's this. Yeah, so it does get somewhat loud. The motors need to be pushing a lot of glass in there, so it's not a surprise, but if they could have opted for quieter motors, maybe, I'm not too sure, but honestly, not that big of a deal breaker. At least you know it's focusing. Now, as we start to move into the quality of the actual glass itself, I think it's worth mentioning that there is very minimal focus breathing, and I think that's what a lot of cinematographers tend to look for, especially in a cine lens like this. Now, I did have the chance to take it out on a bunch of different shoots, and as you can tell from the sample footage, even though I couldn't actually tell on the camera screen just because of that squeeze ratio, it seemed to do really well, and after looking back at the footage, I was really happy with what I got. It rarely missed focus. It really stuck on, and you know it stuck on just because you could still hear the motors. But if you're running audio like most productions do, they tend to have a separate audio source. I'm running one right now, and even outdoors I barely picked up the motor sounds anyways, but it was good to know that it was still focusing. Now, I did shoot most of this at around T1.8 just so I could test exactly how far that depth of field could go. And in terms of minimal focus distancing, it's actually really not that bad. I can get as close as around here, so it's like a good 1.5 feet. Really good, especially because it's a 40mm anamorphic, and you know, what can I say? It's actually really good. Now, if you're just getting into anamorphics and you're wondering if you should purchase one of these, I honestly say this is one of the best options because it has the autofocus feature. Most anamorphics don't have any sort of autofocusing yet. So being able to have that option to autofocus at a budget-friendly price, because it is cheaper than most anamorphics out there right now, I'd honestly just go and get it. And number two, it's actually a really good range to start with. At 40mm, it's not too wide and it's not too narrow. You could still use this for any portraits, any of those tighter medium shots, which is ideal. It's kind of like, you know, the nifty 50, except the anamorphic wideness of that. if that makes sense. You'll get it when you start shooting on it. Now this is a blue streak anamorphic, so it does have that blue flares going on. It's not as strong as most people are saying. It's very subtle actually. I could still use this in normal environments like warm tones here, or if I'm just outdoors running and gunning and just chasing down a squirrel. Now, one thing I will say, because of the way that it's set up on the handle, I actually run into it a bit on my fingers here. And it's not that annoying, it just scratches a bit sometimes. But if you do have bigger hands, it might be an issue. I'm not too sure. I have small hands, so I wouldn't know. But come on, an FX30 with an autofocusing 40mm right on top, and you can just throw it in your bag. That's pretty decent. Anyways, if you like this video, hit that like button and probably subscribe if you want to start seeing more camera content and start to see a little bit more cinematics going on. Alright, it's 2 a.m. I'm gonna go sleep.